Potstirrer podcast, where politics, religion, and history collide, and it's not always polite. In 1998, President Bill Clinton sat in front of a grand jury and denied having a sexual affair with one of his interns, Monica Lewinsky. He also told the American people that he did not have sexual relations with Lewinsky. But this was a lie, and he later admitted to carrying on the relationship. Just 3 days later, on August 20th, 1998, the Clinton administration bombed the Al-Shifa pharmaceutical plant in Sudan under the pretext that the factory was a front for the production of chemical weapons. In actuality, the plant was a civilian target that produced 50% of Sudan's medicines, including medications like antibiotics and prescriptions for diabetes and tuberculosis. These medicines also included much of the country's supply of medication used to treat malaria, a mosquito-borne infection that can cause death as well as stillborn births to infected mothers. The Sudanese people would be short on life-sustaining medicine because Clinton wanted Americans to forget he lied about having sex with a woman who was not his wife. Almost 20 years later, we're back at the Sudanese medicine plant, but in the form of an airfield in Syria. I am your host, Jaye Pool. In the autopsy of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign after her defeat in November 2016, some pundits blamed her loss and Donald Trump's victory on leaked emails involving Clinton, others surrounding Clinton, and the Democratic National Committee that were pilfered by Russian hackers and filtered through WikiLeaks. And it's not like Donald Trump discouraged it.
What do I have to get involved with Putin for? I have nothing to do with Putin. I've never spoken to him. I don't know anything about him other than he will respect me. He doesn't respect our president. And if it is Russia, which is probably not, nobody knows who it is, but if it is Russia, it's really bad for a different reason, because it shows how little respect they have for our country when they would hack into a major party and get everything. But it would be interesting to see. I will tell you this. Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press. Let's see if that happens. That'll be next. Yes, sir.
Since the election, the story of Russian interference has grown from just hacking to help a candidate that might be friendlier to Moscow, as they do around the globe, to possible active collusion between the Trump camp, now the Trump administration, and Vladimir Putin's Russia. For those of us who are students of the Cold War, and even remember the Cold War, it's a bit strange that a candidate could get so close to the presidency and even win with ties to the former Soviet Union. Let's not forget that while today's Russia is more oligarchy than communist, the leader of Russia since 1999 was former KGB and was not thrilled that the Soviet Union lost the Cold War. Times have changed. Now, let me be clear. As I mentioned in the last episode, I believe that Hillary Clinton lost because of Hillary Clinton and because the third way legacy she shares with her husband, Bill Clinton. The issue is that if the potential exists that the United States is being led by someone whose loyalties are to another nation before the United States, another nation that does not support democracy, another nation that does not support equal protection, another nation that does not support diversity, another nation whose interests often run counter to ours, that is a major problem for our society, for our system of governance, and for our sovereignty. And it's not something that a southern border wall or travel ban will solve. There have been calls to investigate charges that Trump representatives such as Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn met with Russian officials and failed to disclose these meetings. Even Trump himself, who turned to Russian oligarchs for funding after his failed businesses and many bankruptcies made him no longer creditworthy to domestic financial channels, may not have clean hands. Some of this is being investigated by the FBI and both houses of Congress. The House investigation was derailed as Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, canceled hearings where former acting Attorney General Sally Yates, Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, and former CIA Director John Brennan were scheduled to testify without consulting with his committee. It was later revealed, according to a story in The Independent, that Nunes visited the White House to go through intelligence reports and meet a secret source that supported his claim that communications involving associates of Trump were caught up in incidental domestic surveillance.
Can you tell us who signed you in at the White House?
We're not going to ever talk about any of that.
Under pressure, Nunes later recused himself from the House investigation. In early April, with Russia investigations dominating the news media, Trump needed a distraction. He needed his own Sudanese medicine factory. Potstirrer podcast will be back after this. Did you know for today's episode? In Alabama, Republican Governor Robert Bentley recently agreed to resign after being under threat of impeachment for using state government resources and law enforcement intimidation to secretly carry on a long-term affair with his fellow churchgoer and former top advisor Rebecca Mason, which ultimately ended his 50-year marriage. But did you know that Bentley's mistress was also the mastermind behind the plan to disenfranchise African American voters in the state of Alabama? Like a number of states have done within the past several years, Alabama has a law that requires voters to show photo identification at the polls. According to the impeachment investigation report authored by special counsel Jack Sharman, in 2015, Mason suggested that multiple driver's license offices in Alabama be closed throughout the state. This would be executed by the closure of 31 DMV offices targeting majority black counties in the region of Alabama known as the Black Belt. This was set in motion despite concerns at the time over possible Voting Rights Act violations. This was eventually overturned due to investigation by the Department of Transportation over the disproportionate impact to minorities in Alabama. But it goes to show that the Voting Rights Act, like other legislation pertaining to civil rights, is still very much needed in the United States. Now, back to Potstirrer podcast. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, Go and do likewise. Luke 10:25 through 37.
Now I hear we want to take in 200,000 Syrians, right? And they could be, listen, they could be ISIS. I don't know. Did you ever see a migration like that? And I'll tell you right now, and I'm putting everybody on notice, and hopefully this gets outside of this room, and I guess it will with all these crazy cameras going back there. I'm putting the people on notice that are coming here from Syria as part of this mass migration, that if I win, they're going back. They're going back. I'm telling you, they're going back.
Syria has been in a 6-year-long civil war between the government led by Bashar al-Assad and rebel groups. The Syrian civil war began after the Arab Spring in late 2010, which was a pro-democracy uprising in several countries in the Middle East and North Africa. This has led to a great deal of death and injury to civilians in Syria, leading to a major exodus of Syrian nationals seeking asylum in Europe and North America, and a major humanitarian crisis. With the backdrop of ISIS attacks in Europe, the Syrian refugee crisis was ripe for a Trump hardline stand. Only 1 week after Trump took office, he used one of his many executive orders to temporarily halt the immigration of refugees from 7 majority Muslim countries as part of his travel ban. But he specifically singled out Syria, stating, "I hereby proclaim that the entry of nationals of Syria as refugees is detrimental to the interests of the United States." On Tuesday, April 4th, sarin gas was used on civilians in Khan Shaykhun, a rebel-heavy area in northwestern Syria. The Syrian government, led by Assad, is believed by the U.S., the UK, Israel, and Turkey to be the party responsible for the chemical attack that led to 89 deaths and 557 injuries, while Assad's regime blamed the rebels for the attack. Russia, which is an ally of the Syrian government, has stated that there should be a UN investigation into who is responsible. In response to the chemical attack, the Trump administration alerted Russia. Then on April 6th, sent 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles to bomb the Syria air base, an airfield controlled by the Syrian government.
To the chemical attack?
I now have responsibility, and I will have that responsibility and carry it very proudly. I will tell you that. It is now my responsibility. It was a great opportunity missed.
Before I move on to the king, can I just quickly ask you if the chemical attack crosses a red line for you?
It crossed a lot of lines for me. When you kill innocent children, innocent babies, little babies, with a chemical gas that is so lethal, people were shocked to hear what gas it was. That crosses many, many lines, beyond the red line, many, many lines.
President George W. Bush got Saddam Hussein. President Barack Obama got Osama bin Laden. President Donald Trump shot up a Syrian airfield, and that airfield was back up and running, shipping out bombs to blow up rebels again just hours after the attack. Donald J. Trump's actions regarding Syria and the Syrians is like coming across someone being murdered, but instead of helping the victim, you watch them die, and then you throw a few firecrackers on the killer's lawn and claim you did something. It is classic NIMBY, N-I-M-B-Y, NIMBY, not in my backyard. NIMBY is a problem with not only Trump, but with certain strains of political and social thought held by some in the United States. Morality without sacrifice. And when you say you have compassion for others, but won't even let them near you and yours because they are the other and you fear them rather than empathize with them, you are no different than the priest and the Levite in the Good Samaritan parable. Trump has their blood on his hands, and no amount of show bombing can change that fact. Taking Trump's erratic actions in the Middle East, the Moab bomb in the airfield, and the theater of coming to his senses regarding Russia. Either he is trying to sell his independence from Russia hard, or he's essentially admitting he got conned when the signs were clear. In either case, Trump is not fit to be president of the United States. Like Potstirrer Podcast on Facebook. Follow the show on Twitter at PotstirrerCast and Instagram at Potstirrer Podcast. I'm Jaye Pool. Let's fight for America's future because freedom is not free.